think we can kick off now. I am Sabina. I've seen quite a few of you by now in all these webinars. I normally do EU and trade policy at techUK, those being both slightly on hold for this month and the past month. So I am leading on this project we are doing, looking at the world post-COVID from a number of different points of view and kind of what role tech plays in various parts of society, economy, the planet, and so on. We've already held 3 of them so far on the future of work, community and society, as well as smart cities. This is the 4th one on emerging and transformative tech, which is very exciting. I'm definitely looking forward to this one. So welcome everyone. I will pass on to my colleague Sue, who will be leading this conversation and who's leading our work on all this interesting stuff at techUK. So over to you, Sue.
Thank you, Sabina, and hello everybody again. As Sabina said, I'm Sue Daley. I'm Associate Director at techUK for Tech and Innovation, so leading all our tech and innovation work. And it's my pleasure and really excited to be chairing this discussion over the next hour, looking at, as Sabina said, emerging and transformative technologies, the role they could play, not just now, but as we move in and we think about our post-COVID future. Before we start, a little bit of housekeeping. We have placed everybody on mute. So speakers, that includes you. So if you could just make sure you unmute yourself. If you would like to ask a question during the session, the chat function is, I was about to say is a go. That doesn't make sense, but it's there for you, which Sabina and myself will be monitoring throughout the chat. So please do feel free to post a question. If you just want to do it privately, please send it perhaps to Sabina or myself or to anyone. We are recording this webinar as well, so all comments are on the record, and we will be sharing this recording afterwards as well. So let's kick off. We've only got an hour and we've got some really exciting speakers. You're not here to hear from me, you're here to hear from them, as I am too. So as Sabina said, this is the 4th in our series, and we really want to talk about the role of emerging and transformative technologies in the current situation and going forward. Clearly, right now, technologies are bringing us all closer to each other, are helping organizations and society to continue in the new norm that we're all facing. We're relying more and more on technologies such as, our phones, our laptops, cloud, video conferencing, of course, much, much more. But we wanted to look ahead and think about, as we move from the response phase to the virus, to the adapt phase, and also to how we looking at our future, our post-COVID future. What are the role that the more emerging and transformed technologies could play in enabling that recovery phase? What do these technologies offer to organizations and to society, and how do we realize that potential then? What would be key to moving us forward? So that's what we're here to explore today. We've got 3 amazing speakers with us today. We've got Dr. Helen Dudfield, Chief Scientific for Training and Human Performance at QinetiQ. Helen, great to have you with us. Gavin Jackson, Managing Director for EMEA at UiPath. Hi Gavin, great to have you with us. And Julie Dawson, Director of Regulatory and Policy at YOTI. Thanks Julie as well for being with us. We really want to get your insights, learn from what you think the role these more emerging and transformative technologies in your particular area could mean to our post-COVID future, and then perhaps what are the steps we need to be thinking about as we look ahead. So with that, we're going to kick off the conversation with a few opening questions from my side, and then we're going to broaden it out to questions from the audience via the chat function, please. So I'd like this to be a bit of a fluid conversation, but let's kick off with, I'm going to ask each of the speakers to just introduce themselves, a little bit about where their organization is in terms of this topic. And perhaps, Gavin, let's start with you. From your perspective and view of the world, what are the key technologies that you think you're seeing helping organizations now, but more importantly, as we look beyond into the post-COVID future, what do you think the role of emerging transformative technologies will be as we look ahead? Thanks.
Sure. So, firstly, thanks for having me, and thanks everybody for attending here today. I think that what we're seeing emerge as a trend today is that there is a very stark difference now between sort of technologies that are discretionary and technologies that you might consider to be critical. And as a company, we're seeing that. We're seeing customers doing the same thing as well, in that we are, we're seeing a lot of companies that are stopping discretionary spend, and they are sort of pouring themselves into things that are for what I refer to as the urgency of now, right now. And there are some technologies that have been around for a while, but there's also, I would say, they've been slower to adopt probably than we would have preferred, or the industry would have preferred. So I remember way back in 2017 when I was leading the Amazon Web Services business in the region, and we just launched the UK infrastructure region, so our cluster of data centers in the region. And way back then, I was arguing for the case that actually certain technologies, including at-scale cloud providers, so at-scale internet-based cloud providers, Google and Amazon, as being national critical infrastructure. And if you think about the reliance then on cloud infrastructure and our daily lives sort of touching cloud infrastructure, and then it also sort of crossing the Rubicon of consumer business as well. So most of the apps that we use every day, either for productivity or for entertainment, are all sort of served and manifest in the cloud. So it really is, or then back in 2017, I was arguing for the fact that it was national critical infrastructure. And I think as you look forward now, I think that has proven to be correct. I think that the cloud is playing a disproportionate role, and companies and ecosystem that hangs off of the cloud are playing a disproportionately important role today, and will continue moving forward as a non-discretionary spend into the future. There's the obvious ones as well, so productivity apps. We're talking through the power of Zoom today. There are other productivity tools available, of course, but the essence of staying connected with teams, with our people, from a mental health perspective, that's helpful. From a connectivity with customers, from productivity and output perspective, these technologies are now critical. They're not discretionary. You cannot connect with your customers or your teams unless you have these technologies in place. And then there's the less obvious productivity paradigms that are also now non-discretionary, are critical, and that is the paradigm of automation. And those companies that have automation at the heart of their digital transformation strategy are faring a lot better than those that don't. And I mentioned earlier on the term the urgency of now, and what we're finding is that people are adopting these technologies with urgency if there is an urgent requirement. I take the very simple case of frontline healthcare today. Still today, in 2020, doctors and nurses spend a disproportionate amount of time, up to 40% of their time, according to the Mater Hospital, 40% of their time still on clerical work that is sort of working with the triaging and the flow of information and the next best steps and everything else that happens sort of in the hospital or the GP setting. And now with automation, we are freeing all of that time and undifferentiated heavy lifting effectively so that they can focus on patient care. And then you fast forward that into what's happening right now in the airline industry. They've got downed planes, they've got their revenues have gone down, but the requirement to service customers at this point in time has gone up. And so they've had a spike, obviously, of activity, and automation is helping to, if you pardon the pun, to flatten the curve of exponential demand without increased revenue coming in. So these are some of the technologies that I think they form gravity today in the urgency of now, and I think will continue to form and evolve in the sort of building blocks of tomorrow at the same time. So the companies that have to respond now are responding. The companies that are observing really kind of then fall into two camps, if I'm honest. There's the camp that are taking this time to prepare themselves, to reskill their staff, to deploy technologies, to think strategically about the output following the COVID crisis. And then there are those that are observing and doing nothing. And if you're an investor on the call, I would suggest you put your money into the first camp at this point.
Thanks, Gavin. And it's a really interesting point that I think we'll touch on. If there are those people then planning and thinking about what these technologies can mean, how, what do they need? How can we help move that conversation forward? Thank you so much. Helen, I think, can we go to you next? Does a lot of that resonate with you from your perspective? Maybe talk a little bit about the work that you're doing at QinetiQ, and also where you see the role of emerging and transformative technologies, particularly. I know you're working a lot on AR, VR. What role that could play in terms of thinking about how we perhaps recover and move forward from the current situation? Thanks, Helen.
Yeah, so, you know, it does resonate a lot. And I think that there's a lot of automation that can happen in learning and training as well. I think it's really important that we consider that we're all suddenly remote from our environments. And then suddenly a group of us are put into environments that we're not familiar with as well, in the key workers and the NHS workers. So we have to skill people, and we have to reskill people very rapidly. And we can't do it in the conventional classroom setting or the teaching setting. So there's a real challenge there. And that's really interesting, because innovations have almost, in a sense, being available but not being adopted, because of a kind of change resistance. And, you know, well, we don't have the right infrastructure, we don't have the right bandwidth, or, you know, this might make me feel a bit ill. And I think we just like park those now, because it has gone. And I think that was the phrase that I wrote down, between kind of critical and discretionary. I think the technologies in the way to immerse people in training have become critical, because you can't leave people to learn via e-learning at home. That's just not going to work. And many of us that, you know, have young children and young adults who are trying to learn at home right now, you can see the difference between the places that are engaging in a kind of human way and the places that are saying, go online and learn your stuff. So augmented reality and virtual reality are two key technologies that are being adopted, and all of a sudden, from being slowly adopted, are being rapidly adopted. And if we look first at augmented reality, well, augmented reality allows you to overlay the real world. You can use a smartphone to do that, or you can use goggles to do that. So one of the key things here is the ability for remote assistance. And I think remote assistance allows me to look through the eyes of somebody else. So it could be somebody working in an intensive care unit, it could be somebody fixing oil and gas, but I can look and see what they're looking at, and then I can give them advice, either to teach them how to operate, to give them some advice of my knowledge base, but I'm not with them anymore. Or it could be that someone has a tricky problem that they need to resolve, or they need to build something together. And augmented reality is being used for remote telemedicine. That's one of the things. So if you imagine people in care homes, you know, it's very difficult to get in there safely and to look after those individuals. You could imagine that your local GP could be helping them in that situation. And the other situation there also is that for augmented reality, that you enable people to have less time in very risky environments, which is really important. It also brings learning to life, and that's really critical, because it's not on its own. You've got to motivate people to learn, and motivation requires training techniques such as gamification, you know, gaming. We love gaming, don't we? So make your learning a gameful experience. And then going in from the kind of overlay to the virtual environment. In the virtual environment, we could be fully enclosed, or we can actually see the outside world. Right now, there are VR helmets that are wireless, that cost 400 quid, that you can just go and order off Amazon, and that puts you in an immersive world. Now, in my environment, in defense training, we're using this to get people used to walking around a ship before they get there. We're using it to practice firefighting skills and emergency procedures. And we have connected people in virtual reality around the world, so they train together. So let's just put that here. We have an ability to put people into an environment that they can practice before they get there. And I think that's really important right now. So if I'm going into a Nightingale hospital, or I've never been there before, imagine if, you know, the doorbell rings, the Amazon guy delivers the new helmet, I put it on, and immediately I'm with a team and a trainer, and they're going through that environment with me. And they're showing me where things are, and I'm kind of like asking questions, and I'm running scenarios now. I'm feeling comfortable enough. The trainer's stopping, we're reflecting, and we're repeating. So that connection within virtual reality will allow people to come together more effectively when they first arrive, and practice skills that I think in the current situation, you know, everybody is trying to figure out how to deal with this situation. So the best thing you can do is to practice to make it as perfect as it can be. And I think that's the kind of environment that, you know, the adoption should be just accelerating. And I'm seeing that already happening.
Fascinating, Helen. So many questions already in my head.
Mm.
Thank you so much. And it's helping people clearly now in the current situation, but as we look to recover and as organizations emerge from the current situation, how do we keep that pace? You know, how do we,
Yes.
recovery will be so important. Therefore, how do we help people, I suppose, and employees hit the ground running, which I think is to Gavin's point as well. But before we kind of, and I'm sure there's a lot of crossover in what we're talking about, but Julie, I'd love to hear your point of view. Great to have you here from YOTI. From your perspective, and then I know it's very much, maybe you can talk a little bit about YOTI and the work you're doing around digital identity. How crucial do you think digital identity and other emerging technologies are going to be to our post-COVID recovery in our future? Thanks.
Thank you, Sue. I saw that. Good. There's quite a few different areas where digital identity or digital age or identity verification come into the picture. I think one of the key areas we've seen is looking at the numbers of NHS staff that have been remobilised, maybe staff that were retired or moved into different professions that have been requested to move back. We also have staff that are moving from one sector of the economy to another and are having to remotely go through onboarding. So for example, with the NHS, we've been enabling staff in the NHS to have a way of digitally identifying themselves. That could be a person that is moving back to the workforce, moving to another premise, meeting people, new colleagues at a different location in person or online. And going forwards, I think when we start to look at telehealth and telemedicine, those sorts of interactions, knowing who it is you're actually dealing with in terms of the doctor that you might be speaking with through a call is really important. And similarly, as we move into testing regimes being developed in different countries in different ways, that is an area that is really key. So to enable an individual over time to have a history of all the different types of tests that they might undergo. They might go through an antigen test, an antibody test, a swab or fingerprint test, and each time there could be details noted by that individual as to what the test was, who was it regulated by, how long might that test last, really specific details in terms of the sensitivity and specificity of that test. And the granularity of that data could be shared anonymously, potentially with certain national health bodies, and then chosen at the choice of the individual, maybe with their employer. Early sectors that we're seeing working in this area specifically are in sports leagues. We all know that football is one of those global areas that brings nations together. And at this time, it's one of those areas that certain sports leagues are thinking, how will we start to, perhaps behind closed doors, put on some very initial sporting activities? And there's lots of different considerations there on both the ethical front as well as the financial front. But actually knowing what the range of tests are that an individual has gone through and the conditions around those are the types of things that are important. So airlines similarly are looking at what will be those first indicators that would enable us to start to see how we could remobilize. Similarly across utilities companies and financial services companies, these sorts of factors are being discussed. And this brings together not just identity tech, but obviously looking at inclusion, looking at the data elements, the privacy elements, and getting a cross collaboration from public health, epidemiologists, consumer health individuals. I'd say the other side of the flip of the coin from the health world where we're involved is very much about people in their homes. So people isolated in their homes are obviously turning to online shopping and looking for either e-commerce services or seamless shopping with drive-through type pickup. So the innovation around contactless pickup and delivery and payment is really key, and looking at how frauds and scams are avoided there. So we have quite a few different approaches looking at supporting both the in-person seamless contactless payment and pickup of goods in physical locations, plus supporting the online e-commerce and secure payment by an individual for various goods. We've talked a little bit about remote working. Also, there's many organizations that are looking at how can they avail of digital signatures and looking at, be it at the hiring of contacts or signing of contracts for either new staff, how they can look to embracing e-signature type technology. On the distance learning front, people taking exams are looking at things like remote proctoring. How will I be able to award a valid qualification to an individual? And on the online entertainment side, whilst there's many positive areas of people, doing great fun leisure activities, we know through speaking with the likes of Big White Wall on mental health support, they're having to gear up to hire and train new mental health support workers. Similarly with suicide support lines, ensuring that the right person has the right training and is qualified, and that call is secure and the data and the call handling systems are secure behind the scenes. So there's a lot of support around some of those online activities where, again, the identity and the qualifications are required. And sadly, during this time, we all know that whilst there's a lot of online, very positive activities, there are also bad actors. And I think Ian Corby is also on the call from the Age Verification Providers Association. And as a trade body, one of the things that we're doing is looking at how approaches to age assurance and standards around that can be developed and adopted globally to ensure in a tokenized, data minimized fashion that the right people of the right age have access to certain online content, online activities. So I'd say that gives you a quick overview, and the key areas at the moment are around health, supporting volunteering, supporting enabling people getting back into the workplace. Those would be our key focus areas for the time being.
Thank you, Julie, and fascinating. And I think a few people found that little quiet. So if you could bring the microphone a little closer to you next time, that would be great.
Thank you.
No, thanks, Julie. Fascinating opening. And I think what comes to my mind is, even from our opening, is pace, right? How these technologies are going to help in the pace that organizations will want to go at as and when we can. What can be done now, and obviously how we can prepare people for that future. And then that third one, it's coming back to people, right? It's how these technologies can support and enable people and therefore organizations to move forward. And also convergence. Gavin, obviously automation is at the heart of all of this, right? So are you seeing the conversations around automation and the technologies that will help us as we move forward? It's really a converged conversation, or is it about our organizations kind of looking at one technology at a time?
I think it's absolutely convergence. It's why I really kind of made this sort of differentiation between what might be considered discretionary, what might be considered critical, because I do believe that there are some new standards that are going to emerge from this situation that all companies, all sort of responsible companies, are going to have to adhere to certain watermarks, I think, moving forward, around continuity, around the resilience of their companies, how they continue to serve customers and so on. So I definitely think it's a converged set of technologies. And I mentioned the sort of centers of gravity of really sort of cloud and productivity in general tools, and then automation being, I think, the three legs of that stool, wrapped around actually to the points that were previously made around security being at the heart of all of those things, of course, because you have to trust, you have to retain and maintain trust in all of these conversations as well. You also mentioned about pacing and time, and what's very clear to me is that, and this is a well-trodden path or well-trodden statement, but necessity is obvious is the mother of all invention. And I mentioned this kind of comment or this statement I use of the urgency of now. Actually, when you look at it from a macro level, most of the areas that we're looking at this point in time, most of the changes that we're seeing have actually been changes that have been happening in slow motion up until this point. So, cloud is not a new thing. It's been deployed mostly for new applications, and then companies are migrating to the cloud. Remote work has been on the agenda, certainly for the CFO, since time immemorial, it would appear. So certainly remote work is, and enabling remote workers with all the tools they need, has always been there. This sort of new emerging or newish emerging space of elastics, physical space, so office, WeWork and spaces and such like, and these companies that have emerged so that you don't have to necessarily invest in real estate. The same thing for people, elastic people, gig economy. I think that these things have all been the case. And, of course, all the innovation that's been happening most recently, in the most recent years, on reinventing all the time the user experience and how customers interact with technology, how customers interact with products and services from various different companies. All of these things have been happening almost in slow motion for the last decade at least, right? All transformed in this digital era. So again, it comes down to a mindset. I think the biggest thing really here that we have to adjust to, and as we emerge out of this situation as a hopefully a stronger ecosystem here in the technology fraternity, is that the mindset has to be right. We're able to, I think, accelerate some of these journeys because we have urgency. We have to do these things now because there's urgency wrapped around it. We're seeing industries in the UK that's springing up in front of our eyes, like the sort of wartime effort in World War II. Imagine what we could achieve if we always had this perpetual sense of urgency and we planned for it systemically. Imagine if we were always and perpetually on the motion of adopting and testing and reinventing all of these technologies and doing it in relative peace times and in normal times. Imagine if we were continuing to reinvent at that time and to adopt these technologies. And imagine if we had a robust technology-driven industrial strategy, right, that also said, well, these are the industries that we think we need to be good at in this country, and they are empowered by digital technologies. And if we have the urgency of now perpetually forever, then we can really be a very great Britain. And I think that is the mindset that we're going to have to all coalesce on as we emerge through the situation. It's really that urgency of now, perpetual motion, and reinventing the future together. So I think pacing is important.
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. And I think from there's a lot being talked about around whether the current situation is accelerating that digital transformation, and I'm getting a sense of that as well, that a lot of organizations are looking at these technologies because either they've had to or because they're thinking about their training, they're thinking about how they can verify people that they want to do business with and that they want to employ, for example. But there are, and we've had a question around as you go towards digital transformation, the issue around migration of legacy systems and legacy applications. And obviously that is not just, part of for enterprises, but across all different sectors and industries, including government. So I don't know if any of the panel have a view on that in terms of their thoughts around, yes, exactly that kind of pace and that digital transformation, but the organizations that we're also dealing with a lot of legacy and a lot of the current now. I don't know if, Julie, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, no, with pleasure, thank you. I think in the industry that we're working in, which is really enabling digital activity online and building trust, one of the key areas that many industries now are starting to realize is that using physical documents in person is actually not practical. One, you can't actually check a document if you're 2 meters away from someone. You can't even see their face if that person is wearing a protective mask. So how can you know who you're dealing with? I think the Edelman Trust Index is a really interesting framework that's been moving for quite a few years, and it shows across different industries the trends and how some organizations are succeeding or failing to build trust. And how we build trust across many industries, I think, is going to be a really key area. Looking at the ethical side, looking at the transparency, and looking at which are the different technologies that support that transparency and support both the cybersecurity, the data responsibility, and those ethical angles. And when we're looking at the area of documents and looking at how you know who you're dealing with, that could be who it is you're recruiting. It could be which is the volunteer that's going to visit your elderly parent, and are they a good actor or a bad actor? It could be looking at who is accessing maybe a children's play area or gaming area. Is that the right person that should be in a, say, under 13s child gaming area or in an adult area? And knowing who those people are is something that up until now has been very challenging. And I think now one of the things that initially kicked off in the financial services world, where you needed to know which financial transaction should be credited to whom is being understood in lots of different contexts. So the UK has been quite forward-leading in this area. And if you look at bodies such as our Companies House, they're trying to see transparently who is setting up a new company, who are the directors. And this is moving into many different sectors. In the retail world, retailers are starting to look at how can we enable seamless shopping? How can we enable, one, that staff are operating in a safe environment at the moment. They're not at risk of contagion, but also they're not at risk in the future of verbal or physical abuse at various instances in their daily work. For instance, at the point of checking age. When we're looking at a health consultation online, we really want to know that that is a registered qualified practitioner we're dealing with. There will start to be, and I'm sad to say, there will be tests that will be flogged that are not worth the ink or paper that they're initially written on. And there will be people that will be duped. We're seeing many different scams happening online. So in previous times, some of the legacy approaches we had of checking who we're dealing with are now having to come up to date. And techUK has a whole working group on this area, and Ruth Milligan, who I think is also on the call, leads that area at techUK. We also have a body called Open Identity Exchange in the UK, which has done a lot of dialogue between public and private sector, and there are emerging trust frameworks and standards in this area. I was yesterday on a call with the World Economic Forum that is also looking at how do we move and build a shared understanding across governments around the world as to how the digital identification technologies can support this rebuilding activity. So yes, lots happening in this area.
Yeah, great, Julie. Thank you so much. Can I ask before, and I've got a great question for Helen, so hang on, Helen. But Julie, can I ask, in terms of the conversation you're seeing around digital ID and how it could help it, you know, now and going forward, what, has there been anything that surprised you? Has there been anything that's come up in terms of a use case or a way that this technology that can help that perhaps was not foreseen or really kind of has struck a chord with you?
I think one of the areas that we've been surprised it hasn't yet moved to has been around things like digital power of attorney. So that I think is still moving quite slow in this part of the world. Yet there are many people who actually haven't set up a digital power of attorney, a physical power of attorney, and haven't been able to do that witnessing. And it's one of the areas in the UK that through the Office of the Public Guardian, for a long time, they've been looking at how to improve that. I have been surprised that some of the guidance that's been issued under COVID powers seems to have been quite rapidly thought through. And I wonder if there should be, and one of the things that the ICO has said is there should be frequent review of the changes made. And at the moment, you can show a document just on a video call for an onboarding, even for a DBS check, a criminal records check. And personally, I would be concerned about that. So if I was a volunteering organisation and I was only doing a check through a visual screen, I think that doesn't offer enough assurance. So I think that there will be listening, there will be further dialogue, but there are areas where fast decisions have been made for reasons of practicality. But there needs to be some wider review on some of these areas and a continual balancing of the risks and the safeguards.
Great, thanks, Julie. Helen, coming to you, we've had a question related to lockdown and moving out of the lockdown perhaps too early or not. And obviously, we're going to hear more from the Prime Minister, I think, today on areas around or the issue of lockdown. But the question was, what's the speaker, and obviously others happy to come in from the speakers as well. What's the speaker's thoughts on staying in the lockdown longer to force humanity to evolve in the way it's working and learning, interacting? So for example, these technologies developments to, you know, speed up a new future and then to perhaps stick to it. Do you have any thoughts on that, and particularly from a learning and a training point of view? You know, is this helping to encourage people to think of how they train their staff, how they, you know, how they get people prepared for or reskill people?
Yeah, I think it's a big challenge, isn't it? So for everybody that is teaching in a different manner now, who has to think about how they teach. It's just a massive challenge for them. Some people, you know, have leapt into this and they've completely adopted it. And you can feel when you're learning online, whatever it's for, whether it's the piano or whether it's a language, it doesn't really matter. But you can tell the difference with that engaging teacher who just sees the camera really as a person and interacts with you in a very natural way, and the person who's really finding it very awkward. So you can see everything from teaching to therapy, to, you know, everything from, you know, doctor's appointments, everything is going online. I think in a way, it forces teachers and trainers in particular to think about how they need to reskill. And one of the areas that's really important here is it's called the flipped classroom. And the flipped classroom concept is effectively that you do most of your learning before you come together. So let's just imagine that we have to do some maths or English. I might do that using a virtual tutor, an adaptive online system based on machine learning and artificial intelligence. And my teacher, my human teacher, is going to be monitoring me, watching what's going on. And then when we come together, they'll go, right, I see that you had a specific problem with X and Y. All we're going to do today is work on X and Y, because I see that everybody else has covered everything. So there's only this one area. And I think that brings in another issue, in that if we start putting adaptive training in, then people can learn at different rates. So I might be doing really, really well at my maths and English and I'm finished. So I'm going on and on and on, but where's my class? My class might need to stop, or some of my class will need to go backwards. So there's kind of an issue there about the kind of flow of people going through the system. Because if I'm sitting at home in my community and I've done my work, then you need to push people on, but you also have a kind of a school year, an educational year that you're trying to achieve as well. So one of the possibilities here is that people are going to be educated faster and qualified faster than the conventional time that it takes for people to train. I think that's really fascinating. I do think it will challenge us to live in different ways, but I also think that as a human, we have to remember that being together is also something that we seek. And I suppose the biggest challenge that I think will come is, how do we bring people together as people again safely and operate in an environment that, you know, is not going to cause this pandemic to rise to the levels it is at the moment, but also have that mixed in with the ability to be remote when you don't need to be together, and that's children as well as adults. And I think that, you know, the open plan environment that, you know, business has adopted is not the place for us to be at the moment. But how do we make that kind of team working environment where we can be creative and communicate together, something that we can sustain for the future? There's a real human element in here. And I think that the short term remote working, you know, I'm already finding, I don't know about the people on the call, I'm already finding it hard with my lack of human contact with colleagues, and a phone call and a video. There's something not quite there. So I think that we need to find the way, and especially for our learners in particular, especially for our young people, for well-being as well. And I think that kind of play and interaction and the social learning of coming together, we are going to have to find a mixed method, and technologies that would enable that to happen safely together as well as remote, they're going to be really important.
Yeah, completely agree, Helen. And we actually had a question around the concept of gamification, of where it could be more broadly used, not just in the learning and development side, but more broadly. Perhaps, as you say, do you think that gamification could help, and others maybe have their thoughts on helping people to interact and have that kind of more human to human contact, even in isolation as we are?
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that gamification provides is the ability to kind of like reward each other, and it can be planned and it can be spontaneous. So you can use gamification basically to, somebody else helped you out, and then hence, you know, they actually get a reward for that. And it all sounds a bit potentially patronizing, potentially it's really effective. A year ago, I started playing an online game. I'm not a gamer, but I thought I better understand this thing, and I'm pretty addicted to it now, I have to say. And in that environment, playing with many people, you actually find that you start to create a relationship with people and some fun and engagement, and you do it because you're doing things together. So I think that there is a way to provide a kind of synthetic representation of face-to-face contact, but I absolutely think face-to-face contact is something that we've got to resolve.
Yeah, I have to say, if you could work on AR, VR being able to give me a virtual hug from a personal point of view, that would be good right now. But Gavin, from a business point of view, is this something that you're seeing from, you know, your conversations and, you know, your customers and your community? Are these the kind of issues that businesses are trying to tackle with in terms of, okay, well, if and when we get back to normality or some sense of normality, how are we going to use technologies to do what we need to do to recover ground that we may need to, but also how do we get this right? What can we do, and what will we need technology to help us to do? Is this something that they're grappling with right now?
It is. So firstly, let me just comment on Helen's last point. I was a little worried actually when my 13-year-old son said that actually he is, you know, meeting people on a regular basis, and then he said on Fortnite. So not quite the same, but nonetheless he's staying connected at least with his friends.
That's my secret addiction. I shall confess.
Well, there you go.
We can compare skins another day, Helen. But yes, there is comments about and plans afoot, I think, to you know, prepare very differently. I think that because of the nature of some of the new technologies that we're talking about here, so machine learning and AI, augmented reality, you know, how to manipulate data, automation, you know, a lot of the time the learning the learning experience is immersive. It's more experiential than theoretical. So you have to almost have the interaction with the technology and the not only just the mindset to want to adopt and everything else, but you have to be able to immerse yourself into that technology. And so what we have been doing as a company, we have what we refer to actually as immersion labs for that very reason. These are physical labs, and we're just in the process at the moment of launching. We're not quite there yet, but just trying to build an immersive virtual reality version of our immersion labs, you know, where you can still sort of build automations, interact with digital assistants, and you can actually see the technology playing out in front of your eyes as if you were in the immersion lab. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing, as Helen was pointing out, but it's definitely a step towards, you know, what normal might look like. In fact, I think that, you know, our immersion labs happen to be in Bucharest, where we have a big development center and we have lots of our engineers, and not everyone can get out to Bucharest. Not everybody has the budgets to get out to Bucharest, even in normal times. And so having the capability to do that actually makes it more exponentially scalable as well. So you can get if you can sort of recreate the immersive experiential training that people need to immerse themselves into these technologies in the digital form, then that becomes an infinitely scalable model at the same time. And you can even sort of thin it out a little bit and make it less instructor-led and more self-served in that regard, with sort of, if you like, tube maps that the people will follow through the journey of that immersion. So we're definitely seeing that. I also think, and we were talking about this in my team just recently, about what role regulators are going to have and policymakers are going to have in this sort of emerging space that we're going to come into, and the role specifically the technology can play here, because there will be, in order for us to get to any form of normality, there will be elements of tracking and tracing and so on. And already you get to that very thorny issue of empowering movement and tracking and tracing and doing that, if you will, for the greater good of saving lives and so on, versus privacy. And privacy is something that we should hold dear, and we should, you know, keep very sort of locked up and be custodians of. But we also have to balance that with the opening up of industries and saving lives, frankly. So there's an interesting balancing act there. I think there's also a role, and we've seen actually regulators in the UK leaning into technology in a big way, I think, over the last few years. If I take the Financial Conduct Authority, for example, financial services, they've done an excellent job, I think, in helping customers to adopt new technologies like the cloud. I think, however, what we can do is just be a little bit more open in the sort of triumvirate of customer, supplier, and regulator, all in the same room having these discussions, rather than sort of supplier or technology company and regulator, and then separately regulator and customer, because the guidance oftentimes is still a little bit blurred. So if we want customers to really adopt these new technologies at speed and really kind of be the sort of powerhouse that we think we can be as an industry, as a nation, then we also need to just continue and evolve the speed of that triumvirate working together in policy making and regulation.
Yeah, completely agree. And actually, we had a question on that, and to me to reflect on what you said, Gavin, it's absolutely about getting this right, and it's absolutely about getting the right balance. And it's never going to be an either or. It's how you find the right path through, and how you balance and get that balance right between what do we need to do for society and how do we need to make sure that we're doing this in a transparent, open, data protection, data privacy compliant way. Absolutely. So I don't know if yourself or Julie, maybe, I don't know if you want to touch on this. We had a question around that. So do you think the laws, rules and regulations on data protection and cyber will be impacted as a result of the advance of technology that we need to speed up in light of COVID-19? So do you think that there will be changes? Perhaps, Julie, from your point of view, do you think laws and rules and regulations, or even perhaps, Gavin, regulators need to change or will be impacted by where we are and where we're going? I think you're on mute. That's going to be, I'm going to get that cushion, like embroidered on a cushion. I think you're on mute.
I think Gavin made an excellent point with regards to the great work that the FCA have done recently through their sandboxing. And the concept of RegTech sandboxing has got, different terms in different parts of the world. We've had great examples also of the GovTech Catalyst here in the UK. And looking at the safety tech area, there's an accelerated capability environment that's been set up between GCHQ, DCMS and the Home Office. And I think we will need more of this RegTech sandboxing in order to try and bridge exactly that gap between industry and the government, regulators, academics, and bring those together more quickly, more speedily to face the issues that are coming downstream. I saw just in the last few days, there's been a consultation through with GDPR, and one of the classic areas that has been raised has been a simple thing about registries, the domain registries. And at the moment, those consultations, sometimes it's a year before the output of a consultation comes out. Yet we're seeing in the journalistic world that it's possible through various different sorts of tech for all of the regulatory elements coming out of multiple health boards in 21 health authorities with advanced data visualization. There was a partnership between a Swedish newspaper and a startup called United Robots, and they built an automated system to do that monitoring. We need to be having similar forms of advanced co-working in areas such as how do we change consultation periods and responses. I think quite a few of us on these calls might have been waiting many months for some consultation responses that now might be mothballed for another year. Is that really right? Are there ways to do that better? Let's hope that things such as the online harms area is not one that's neglected for the next couple of years because of this as an excuse, when we see that this is an area where, due to lockdown, a lot of people, be that domestic violence, be that child abuse, are even more under threat. So yes, I'd say, to echo the previous point, the sandboxing area is really one that we should look at more, and bringing parties together and using some of this innovation to actually look at GovTech itself.
Thanks, Julie. We had a question actually, or rather just a statement of digital twin. And actually, digital twin technology is something that we're doing a lot of work on at techUK in terms of how digital twin technology, and obviously this brings in, I think, Helen, AR, VR as well, in terms of a tool that's used in the digital twin world. Just wonder if any of our speakers have a view on the role or possible role digital twin technology could play in helping organizations in the kind of post-COVID future. Anybody have a view on that or thought?
Yeah, I think that digital twin is really important, and the use of an immersive environment for a digital twin means that people will be able to come together, and that can be to design future systems, So, you know, one of the ventilator teams was already using HoloLens in their design of their ventilator for their challenge. That's really interesting. So it doesn't just have to be fully immersive, but a digital twin has this amazing benefit in that if you're creating an environment or a system, when you design and develop it, you do that in a digital twin method. But then also you use it so that people become familiar with it and know how to use it. And if things go wrong, you go back to that environment and test it out again. So for me, digital twins really interesting. And the second concept that's interesting, and that is the digital human. So let's not just think about it as a physical system, because you can create virtual humans when you're capturing expertise. And one of the terrible things about this pandemic is, of course, the loss of our expertise, especially in the older generations. And I think one of the challenges out there will be about how do we gather and gain and keep that expertise, perhaps in a digital manner. And it sounds a bit Star Trek, right? But I think that there's something in that space, as well as the more physical embodiment of technology.
Yeah. Somebody's just mentioned digital avatars.
Yeah,
but,
absolutely.
Gavin, is this what we should be thinking about in terms of going forward? Is this you know, the kind of things that perhaps we haven't had to think about, as you say before, that we now need to be thinking?
I think so, and there are lots of subcategories, I think, as well in the sort of master category of digital twins, and a lot of the categories of digital twins are rules based. So it's not necessarily always going to be how a digital twin might sort of think, which is more general intelligence, as that sort of emerges as a digital twin alternative. But a lot of it is rules based, and what we are finding already today, a lot of the success, I suppose, that the automation industry is having at large, and my company, I think, in particular, is that we are creating digital assistants, digital twins that sit on our desktops and do the drudgery work that actually we as humans have wanted to shelve for years, so that we can actually then focus on more of the innovation, more of the higher level creative tasks, and far less of the clerical, repetitive, rules-based processes that we have to go through over and over again. So that kind of comes in the form for us in our world in two form factors, actually. One is a digital twin or a robot, if you will, a software robot that will sit in a business process workflow. Let's call it procurement or procure to pay, or some rules-based process. And the robot would just simply do what the human was otherwise doing, and then adding capacity. So we've been very helpful, I think, to companies in recent times with those spikes of activity that I mentioned, the number of correspondents, the payments for social services, the loans processing with banks and businesses and so on. Extra spikes require sort of augmented workforce. And we've also seen it then on desktops in the sort of more attended digital assistant, where you're asking and commanding a digital robot to do the work that you would otherwise be doing, either that they've recorded that process and sort of mimicked what you've been doing, or you've just sort of integrated and threaded applications together that you might ask for time and time again. Let's call it an end of month financial report. We'll go into the same applications and the same data sets and the same things every time, and the digital assistant will just go do all of that, prepare it in the form and factor you need, arm you with that intelligence just on command. And then the next incarnation of all of that, as you've heard me talk about before, Sue, is my vision for Iron Man's suit to come alive, the Jarvis AI, the digital assistant of all digital assistants, Jarvis, where you have an action and a reaction to everything. And if you like, that digital assistant really becomes the application of applications. It becomes the thing that you interact with most, and conversational AI is the most natural form of interaction. And then the robot, the digital assistant, the software will then go into all the systems of record, go into all of the data sources, and pull back what it is you need when you need it in a timely fashion. And so I can definitely see that there's lots of categories, as I mentioned, of digital twins, but that is one area that we're seeing really today gain momentum and traction with customers.
Yeah. I have to say, as someone who's living on her own right now, and I can't name her because she will wake up, my digital assistant has become great company for me in these times. I can't say her name because she will interrupt us, but absolutely. And I think that's a fascinating area that I know our techUK's digital twin working group is focusing on as well, and a lot more to discuss there. Sadly, we are coming to the end of our time. I can't believe it, and we could go on and go on and go on. Yes, Rosie, that is her name. I think I would love to kind of try and round up with a final question for me, if I could, to the panelists, and in David Dimbleby style, short and sweet and quick and concise if you can. Julie, we'll go to you first. It's just really a kind of reflections on what do you think we need to do next, or what's the one or two things that you think is important to make everything we've talked about a reality, and make sure that people can use these technologies going forward in their recovery, and what we need to do to get back to new normal and thrive in the post-COVID world. So one thing if you can, but I'll give you two in a minute. What would you like to see happen next?
So the one area that I don't think we've discussed at all, which is really important for everyone in society getting back, is the inclusion and accessibility angle. In our world, that's people without devices, without documents, with disabilities. And I'd say if we thought of one thing going away from here, it would be, how do we weave that in alongside the ethics and transparency? That has been a big move over the last year from techUK, and thank you for leading on that, Sue.
No, absolutely. How do we leave no one behind? I completely agree. Thank you. Gavin, I'm going down the line because Helen's over here. So Gavin?
No worries. So the first thing I'll say is that I think that the customers could use this time to form a realistic plan as they emerge from this situation. The plan should include how they're reskilling their people, to Helen's points from earlier, and how they're adopting these technologies with urgency. I guess the last thing I'll say is I'm going to have to, if we do sort of make it out in good time to work in the physical domain again, I'm going to learn how to wear outdoor shoes, because I've become very comfortable with my slippers. I don't think I'll ever be able to have a meeting again when I'm not in my slippers. So it's going to be a big adjustment.
Oh no, next time we see each other, Gavin, let's both wear slippers. Helen, what would you like to see happen, or what do you think is key to happen next?
So for me, one of the things we haven't talked about is that experimentation with technologies and innovation. And I think that, there are so many processes to get things in place. If you follow the normal process, it'll be next year. So agile design and agile innovation and sprint-based methodologies and experimentation with end users is really important. So we need to get it out there and we need to try it. And as we're trying it, we need to get the feedback from the users and do some rapid assessment of evidence. So rather than a more conventional, longer route, I think we really need to put some pilots out there and see what the reality is and see what the benefit is, and getting the community engaged to make that change happen.
Absolutely, and I think it's a great bookending. Obviously, Julie talking about inclusion and diversity, but obviously if this is about retraining and reskilling, it's about bringing employees on this journey as well with us, right? If things are going to change, and if the work, as Gavin said, the workplace is going to change, whether it's a slippers or non-slippers workplace, how do we bring everybody along on this journey with us as well? Because it's undoubtedly that these technologies are going to change not just the way that we all live our lives, the way that we all learn new skills like piano and or exercise or communicate with our friends and family or colleagues, but how we work as well, and how we move forward. Clearly these technologies, whether it's automation, RPA, AR, VR, digital identity, AI in my area, cloud, all the way up to, we're doing a lot of work around digital twin, edge technology, drones, all these technologies are going to play their part, right? So this has been a fascinating conversation, and I think only the start. Laura Foster, who I know is on the line, is our program manager for all our tech and innovation work. So she's doing a lot of work around looking at the role emerging in transformative technologies, including 3D printing, geospatial data, and others are playing and are going to play as we move forward. So if anybody's interested in getting more involved in that work, please do get in touch. I'd just like to finish by saying thank you everybody for joining us. This has been a fascinating conversation, and thank you to our speakers. Thank you to Helen, thank you to Gavin, and thank you to Julie. Thank you so much for agreeing to be part of this, and I hope you have enjoyed the conversation too. Next up, we will see you next week for our 5th webinar, right, Sabina? This is number 5, which we're focusing on the future of trade negotiations. So tune in for that one next week. Great background, Gavin. This webinar will be has been recorded, so will be posted, and we can send that around to you all as well. But it just ends for me to say thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much for being part of this discussion, for all your great questions. Most importantly, stay safe, stay well. Check out our techUK COVID-19 Information Hub for any information you may need from us. We will see you again very soon. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.